Hi, welcome to another IELTS video. In this video, I would like to address a problem that is common among IELTS candidates, and that is what to do when you start writing your essay and you can't think of true-to-life examples to support your argument. If you find this video helpful and you would like to watch more, visit my blog at IELTSIELTS.com, and to interact with me and other IELTS candidates, come join the forum at IELTSnetwork.com. To help demonstrate a case study in today's lesson, we are going to use the following essay question. In your opinion, what environmental problem poses the greatest risk to humanity? Suggest ways it can be solved. So this question would be responded to using an argument essay structure. We would state what the environmental problem that we believe is the greatest risk to humanity in the introduction paragraph, and then we would use the two supporting paragraphs to suggest ways that this problem could be solved. So let's go through the motions that we would exercise when in the examination room. So we see this question, we've decided that we are going to write an argument essay, and now we need to decide what specific environmental problem we are going to focus on in the essay. So for the sake of today's lesson, let's go with unsanitary drinking water, or maybe we could word it growing rates of unsanitary drinking water. Okay, that's the main problem we're going to look at. Now, what we are doing in the body parts of the essay is suggesting ways that this problem can be solved. So, so in the few minutes before we actually start writing, we want to brainstorm and have an idea about where the essay is going to go, where it's going to progress to, what we're going to write about. So we want to come up with two ways that we're going to argue this problem can be solved. So let's say that maybe the first way could be making it easier for people to open lawsuits against companies that pollute water. So basically, maybe having governments empower people and allow them to take on rogue companies more easily. Okay, so maybe we could say that that's our first supporting point. So make it easier for people to open lawsuits against companies that pollute. Okay, and then perhaps supporting point two could be something along the lines of holding companies accountable for their actions, and perhaps we could do this by forcing companies that work near sources of drinking water to have regular meetings with the communities that exist around those areas and that consume that drinking water. So something like hold companies accountable through community meetings. Okay, so these are going to be the two positions that we're going to take. These are going to be the two ways that we're suggesting that that unsanitary drinking water can be improved, or rates of unsanitary drinking water can be improved. Okay, now as we're mentally preparing to write the essay, so we've come up with the two positions. We also want to sort of start to think about what sort of examples could we use. And as I've shared in earlier videos, the best sort of examples are those that you connect to true life, that are examples from the real world. It adds a certain weight to your argument. It's difficult for the examiner or the reader to read your essay and to disagree with you if you're using true-to-life examples, because you're showing, okay, this is my position, and look, this example exists in the real world, and thus I can conclude, you know, X, Y, Z. Okay, so there's a logical progression to what you're saying. Now, as I said in the beginning of this video, so today we're looking at what do we do when we can't think of fitting examples, of fitting real-world examples to support these points. So in this situation here, perhaps we can't think of an actual example in the real world where governments have made it easier for people to open lawsuits against companies that pollute. Okay, and in these situations, my advice to you is to make up an example. So to just pull an example from your head. Now when I say that, this is within reason, so of course you don't want to make up an example, you know, that is, that perhaps goes against something that is very widely known. I mean, for example, you wouldn't want to say that there was some example about World War II starting in 1990 or something like that. But if you're kind of generally just sort of talking and referring to a country or a company or this or that, your examiner is not really going to look into how true your example is. It's not a polygraph test. It's a test of how well you can communicate a message in English, right? So it's okay to make up an example here and there. Just so long as it's not too outlandish. So let's say that our example here could be something to do, I'll pull an example from Canada, okay? So perhaps the example could be that, Canada, let's say Canada does not make it easy for people to open lawsuits against companies that pollute, okay? And you know, again, I mean, this is, if you were to look into this and Google search it, I mean, this could be completely inaccurate, but the average person probably doesn't know one way or the other whether this is true or not. You know, we could probably squeak by with this on our IELTS exam. So Canada should make it easier for the above. And this would, you know, these are very quick notes that we're making to ourselves in the first couple of minutes when we're in our examination, just to kind of give us some framework that we can work from when we go to write our IELTS essay. Okay, and then the same thing here, hold companies accountable through community meetings. Perhaps we would want to show some sort of case study. Just one sec, I'll put this so it's all on the same page. So, you know, I might share an example about Scandinavian countries, and I might say that, well, in Scandinavian countries, there are laws in place that you know, push companies to report to the communities that they're operating around, and for the sake of this essay, specifically companies that work in and around sources of drinking water, okay, that they have to report. Now, I honestly don't know if that's true one way or the other, and I'm assuming that the examiner probably isn't going to, you know, look too deeply into it either. But so long as we write in a convincing way and share the example in a convincing way, this is really just, you know, the essay is a test of your writing. It's not so much a test of your ability to tell the truth all the time. So let's say that the example could be something about, I don't know, it's sort of a case study we'll do. So Scandinavian countries, let's say, I don't know, have implemented, let's see, legislation that forces companies operating around sources of drinking water to disclose their operations, something like that. Very, very general. When we get into writing the essay itself, we'll talk in much more specific terms. Okay. So now I want to write the essay from start to finish, and you have to bear with me because I haven't prepared too much ahead of time. So we're just gonna kind of pull this from my head as we go along. But we're going to use these two examples and these two suggested ways to counter the problem of polluted drinking water in our essay. Okay, so let's just go back up real quick and read the essay question once more so we've got it nice and clear in our minds. So in your opinion, what environmental problem poses the greatest risk to humanity? Suggest ways it can be solved. Okay. Okay, that's very straightforward. So we're going to start our essay with a background statement. Okay, and so if we're talking about environmental problems and we want to at some point get specifically to the problem of polluted drinking water, perhaps the first sentence could be something sort of general about the state of the environment in the modern world and how things are I mean, you know, we could say they're not looking very good, that things are perhaps kind of grim to an extent. So let's say something like the environment, environment today is threatened by many factors. Okay, something kind of just general. I mean, we're not specifically talking about water yet, and that's fine because we're leading the reader into our specific niche for this essay. So now we can use some transition language, maybe. However, among the most concerning is polluted drinking water. Okay, so the environment today is threatened by many factors. However, among the most concerning is polluted drinking water. And concerning, we're referring back to these factors. Okay, now we've narrowed it. We're talking about drinking water. Now let's be even more specific and let's say unsanitary drinking water is a growing global problem that impacts the health of millions of people and on a daily basis, let's say. Okay, so now we're being very specific. This is precisely the area we want to look at in the essay. This is the problem that is most pressing for humanity. Unsanitary drinking water is a growing global problem that impacts the health of millions of people on a daily basis. Okay, now we need some sort of sentence, the outline sentence, to kind of perform the function of declaring an outline for the essay. So let's say this essay will suggest 2 viable ways of improving the situation. And if you wanted to be more specific and state the 2 ways that we had brought up before, you could. I'm not going to do that here, but so basically the examiner will read through this introduction paragraph. They know exactly where you stand on the situation, what you feel is the most serious and pressing problem for humanity as far as environmental problems go, and they know that there's going to be a certain that you're going to go over 2 ways of improving the situation, which fulfills the instruction words in the question, which suggest possible solutions for this problem. Okay, so now we're going to get into our first supporting paragraph. Now, because we've done a little brainstorming before we started writing, I feel a certain confidence. I feel like I already know what I'm going to say. We're not writing off of the cuff here at all. This is something that we've kind of had some brainstorm about and some pre-thinking about. So let's get to the first point, which we said governments should make it easier for people to take on companies if these companies perform improperly. So firstly, governments should uphold, let's say, strict penalties for companies that fail to operate in environmentally friendly ways, let's say. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, we were going to talk about Canada, and in countries like Canada, for example, please notice my use of commas, the government, let's say, should loosen regulations that restrict the capping of lawsuits, okay? Restrict the capping of lawsuits levied against companies with practices, let's say, that harm the environment. Just let me scroll up and make sure that we're not repeating any vocab here. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to put this onto a new page. Okay. So firstly, governments should uphold strict penalties for companies that fail to operate in environmentally friendly ways. In countries like Canada, for example, the government should loosen regulations that restrict the capping of lawsuits levied against companies with practices that harm the environment. Okay, and now we could leave it like this. or if we wanted to, maybe we would change this wording a little bit to reflect that government should make it easier for people to take on, to take on companies. We could just state it just like that, nice and clear, nice and specific, maybe a little bit more in keeping with the example. But this topic sentence works fine. Okay, now, so here I've made up an example. I actually don't know if this is true or not in Canada, and that's fine. It's something that it helps to support my point. And the examiner understands. I mean, you're in the exam room. You don't have access to a library. You don't have access to Google. You don't have access to anything except your mind. So pulling true to life examples is going to be a difficult affair. Now we want to discuss this example, and we want to point out that in empowering people, it helps to ensure that companies are complying with environmentally friendly business practice. Okay, so maybe we could word something like, okay, now doing so, to add a bit of cohesion, let's see here. The government should loosen regulations that restrict the capping of lawsuits levied against companies with practices that harm the environment. Okay, doing so, and we're referring to this, doing so would, let's say, make these companies liable for their damages, or maybe for any damages, for their damages, and thus less likely to engage in risky and dangerous activities. Okay, so doing so would make these companies liable for their damages and thus less likely to engage in risky and dangerous activities. Okay, so just providing a bit of discussion, we're showing how the example in Canada, which is, we're saying that Canada has a bit of a problem. If they were to change this, then this would help set the stage for cleaner drinking water. So we've discussed the example here. Now we want to draw some sort of conclusion, and we want to tie this conclusion back to the central idea that this course of action would be a fitting suggestion to the problem that we've outlined in the introduction paragraph, which is unsanitary drinking water. So such increased penalties, we might say, would act as a tremendous, perhaps a step towards improving the world's drinking water. Okay? So just have a look at that sentence there. Such increased penalties, or perhaps even we would say such such empowering of people. That would be a good way to word it as well. But anyway, such increased penalties would act as a tremendous step towards improving the world's drinking water. So we're linking this back to the main theme of the essay. And we're stating very clearly to the examiner that this is a viable suggestion to the problem, right? And don't forget that is the main thing in the essay question, is providing suggestion to the problem. Now let's go to the second supporting paragraph, and I'm just going to go back up to remind myself of what that supporting point was. Right, okay, hold companies accountable through community meetings. And we were going to share an example of Scandinavian countries have implemented legislation that forces companies operating around sources of drinking water to disclose their operations. Okay. Okay, so hold companies, okay. So, let's see. So we might want to use a word like transparent. Transparent is a good way of describing making something easy for everyone to see. Accountable is a great word too. We're going to include these here somehow. So secondly, companies must be transparent, or made transparent, but transparent is fine too. And perhaps, declaring to the world, so in public, when reporting of any possible contaminants, that contaminants, how have I spelled this wrong here? That have leaked, you could say, or not for sure, that may have leaked into a water supply, let's say. Okay. Secondly, companies must be transparent and public when reporting of any possible contaminants that may have leaked into a water supply. Okay, and we might even frame this differently and say made transparent and public, because you know, the companies themselves, companies are companies, they're chasing profits, and it's more the law that has to kind of coax them into doing the right thing. Okay, now let's suggest perhaps something like mandatory meetings. So companies, they must meet with the communities, as we were saying earlier in this video. The communities that live around these sources of drinking water, they must disclose their operations to these communities. They must disclose any testing that they've done, these sorts of things. So a bit of cohesion here. Companies must be made transparent and public when reporting any possible contaminants. Okay, this can be achieved. Okay, so this, what are we referring to? We're referring to the idea that was brought up before, a bit of cohesion, by making community meetings mandatory for all companies that operate near a source of drinking water. Let's see, does this make sense? This can be achieved by making community meetings mandatory for all companies that operate near a source of drinking water. Okay, now we come to the point where we want to share a true-to-life example, and I don't know a true-to-life example of this. And that's where the whole, you know, idea of bringing in Scandinavian countries, I mean, I'm honestly just kind of pulling a bit of a stereotype from my mind, because whenever I think of Scandinavian countries, I think of you know, lots of land and lots of fresh water and nature and trees and this sort of thing. So who knows how accurate that is, but that's what I'm going to go with today. So let's say examples of the effectiveness of such meetings can be seen in several Scandinavian countries, and I mean, you could be even, you know, more specific. It can be seen in Sweden, or it can be seen in whatever. Actually, maybe that's what I should do here. I'll be even more specific. So, examples of the effectiveness of such meetings can be seen in Finland, let's say. Okay. In Finland, and let's just expand this a little bit further. Where companies, let's say, are required to regularly provide testing results and perhaps declare any concerns. So declare concerns immediately. Okay. So examples of the effectiveness of such meetings, again, piece of cohesion linking back to the sentence prior, can be seen in Finland, where companies are required to regularly provide testing results and declare concerns immediately. Now, as I've said several times, I have no idea whether this is true for Finland or not. It probably is true, but it's a complete assumption, and it supports our position quite well. So, as Finland is known to have some of the highest quality drinking water in the world, again, I have no idea whether that's true, the merits of forced company accountability are clear. So here you can see that we're kind of wrapping everything up. We're tying it back to the central theme of the essay. And we're using the example to show that this works in Finland. It could work for other countries as well. So basically the evidence is providing, is making it clear that this course of action could be a very positive one for the world at large. Okay, so the merits of forced company accountability are clear. Okay, now we get to the conclusion paragraph. And we want to, again, very quickly summarize what we've said in the essay. So just going to remind myself here, the first point was to make it easier for people to take action against companies. And the second was holding companies accountable through community meetings. And then we want to state our sort of position again, maybe not as strong as in the introduction, but just state that that we feel that unsanitary drinking water is the world's most major environmental problem at the moment. And then we want to share some sort of closing, which I usually like to use a recommendation or a prediction. I find this is a nice way to sign off. It sort of, it leaves the reader in a comfortable place. It allows you to be positive as well, which is kind of a nice way to close your essay, especially when you're talking about something negative like environmental pollution. So perhaps we would start with something like, as this essay has shown, the threat of polluted drinking water can be countered. Maybe we might even say here, the threat of polluted drinking water is a very major concern and can be countered by using fines, or by perhaps empowering, it's a good word to use that we haven't used yet, by empowering the legislative power of people. Oh, I've used power twice here. Okay, by empowering the legislative ability of people, and mandated meetings to hold companies, accountable for their actions. Okay. And let me just get this onto a new page so it's nice and clear. Okay. So as this essay has shown, the threat of polluted drinking water is a very major concern and can be countered by empowering the legislative ability of people, and mandating meetings. And sorry, I'm doing so much editing here, but just a few things are popping out to me. Mandating meetings that hold companies accountable for their actions. Now we want to finish with some sort of, perhaps a prediction. We might say that this is a course of action that we hope will be exercised the world over in the future. So it is hoped, these strategies, again, little tiny, cohesive devices that your examiner will note. So don't forget to include them. It is hoped these strategies are increasingly put into practice in the foreseeable future, which is a word I like very much when closing an essay. All right. So that is an essay from start to finish. I will include a text version of this in the comment section of this video if you'd like to just kind of see the essay as one large cohesive unit. So I hope that helps to clarify a couple of strategies that you can follow if you get into the situation where you can't think of a true-to-life example. Thanks very much for watching, and have a nice evening.